Thomas Hale had never believed his life would be remembered. That wasn't self-pity. It was a fact he'd grown comfortable with. He lived alone in a narrow rented house on the edge of a quiet English town, the kind of place where nothing happened loudly enough to be called important. His mornings began the same way every day. Kettle on, toast slightly burned, radio murmuring about delays on trains he wasn't even taking. Thomas worked as a records analyst for an insurance firm. His job was to read what others had written long ago and decide whether it still mattered. Dates, names, causes. If a document said a fire happened on the 14th, his job was to make sure it hadn't really been the 13th. If a man claimed he'd been wronged, Thomas decided whether the paper trail agreed. He trusted records more than people. Paper, at least, didn't lie out of fear. That evening, he sat at his desk, reviewing a case that refused to settle neatly. An old one, centuries old, the sort of claim that had been reopened for historical clarification, whatever that meant. A margin note caught his eye. Witness account inconsistent. Timeline unclear. Thomas sighed, rubbing his eyes. He typed a reminder to revisit it in the morning, then closed the laptop. Outside, the streetlights flickered on. Inside, the house was warm, predictable, safe. As he went to bed, one thought lingered. Not dramatic, just tired and human. If things happened when they were supposed to, he muttered, life would be easier. He turned off the lamp. The house went dark, and the night passed without dreams. Thomas woke to the sound of his alarm. For a moment, everything was exactly as it should be. The ceiling above him was familiar. Hairline crack near the corner. Faint shadow where the paint had never quite settled. The air was warm. The bed didn't feel strange beneath him. He reached out, silenced the alarm, and lay there listening to the quiet hum of the house. No dreams. No sense of panic. He checked his phone. Full battery. No notifications. No signal either, but that wasn't unusual this far from the town center. Downstairs, the kettle boiled. Water ran hot. The house behaved as if it understood its responsibilities. It was only when Thomas stepped outside that the morning hesitated. The street was empty. Not early morning empty. Not everyone's at work empty. Empty in a way that felt unfinished. The road beneath his feet wasn't asphalt. It was uneven stone, damp with mist. The usual line of parked cars was gone. In their place stood wooden fences, low and crooked, as if they'd grown there rather than been built. Thomas turned slowly, taking it in. The air smelled of smoke. Not petrol, not damp leaves. Smoke from burning wood. Further down the street, a bell rang. Deep, slow, intentional. A man passed him, pulling a cart. He wore thick wool, heavy boots caked with mud. He didn't glance at Thomas, just nodded once, the way one might acknowledge a lamppost. Thomas opened his mouth, then closed it again. His heart began to beat louder, as if trying to warn him. He walked toward what should have been the town square. The buildings were still there, but older, lower, their windows smaller. A church stood where a supermarket used to be, its stone darkened by centuries it hadn't yet lived. Near the well, a woman laughed. A child chased a dog. Life went on, unbothered by its own impossibility. Thomas stopped a man and asked the question carefully, as if tone might save him. "Excuse me, what year is it?" The man frowned, confused by the need for asking. "The year of our Lord," he said slowly. 1723. The word settled into Thomas's chest and stayed there, not loudly, not violently, like a weight he would not be able to put down. Thomas did what anyone sensible would do. He tried to disappear. He kept his head down, avoided questions, stayed near the edges of the village, where people were too busy surviving to stare at him for long. He told himself that if he stayed quiet enough, this might pass, that there would be rules to this, some logic he hadn't understood yet. By mid-morning, he learned how wrong that assumption was. A disturbance rippled through the village like a cold wind. Conversations stopped halfway. Doors closed more firmly than before. 2 constables moved through the square, speaking in low voices, their hands resting near wooden batons. Something had happened. Thomas caught fragments as people whispered around him. A theft near the mill. A man struck in the dark. A missing purse. A broken lock. Details changed depending on who told it. But one thing stayed constant. The crime had occurred the night before. The same night Thomas had slept. Near the mill, a woman spoke sharply to one of the constables. She gestured toward the road then, without hesitation, pointed in Thomas's direction. He was walking there, she said, before dawn. Thomas felt his stomach tighten. He tried to explain. Carefully, politely. I don't belong here, he said, immediately realizing how badly that sounded. The constable studied him, not with anger, with calculation. Thomas's clothes were strange, too clean. His hands were soft, no calluses, no marks of honest labor. And worst of all, he couldn't name where he was from in a way that made sense. When asked his trade, he hesitated. I work with records, he said. The word meant nothing to them. The second constable stepped closer. So you're right, he said. And you wander at night. Thomas shook his head. No, I read. The silence that followed was worse than shouting. People who had been merely curious now looked cautious. Caution, in a place like this, did not take long to become suspicion. The constable nodded once. Then you'll come with us, he said, until matters are clearer. Thomas opened his mouth to protest. Then he noticed the rope looped neatly at the constable's belt, and he closed it again. They did not take Thomas to a cell. There was no iron door, no stone corridor, no place that felt designed for guilt. Instead, he was led into a low wooden building near the square. It smelled of damp straw and old smoke. A table sat at the center, scarred with knife marks and ink stains, as if arguments had been carved into it over years. The constables did not shout. They did not threaten him. They asked questions. Where was he born? Why was he walking before dawn? Who could vouch for him? Each answer Thomas gave created two new problems. He named places that did not exist yet. He described systems that required explaining. He used words that sounded suspiciously clever. Records. One man repeated, frowning. So you keep other men's truths. Thomas tried to slow himself down. There should be evidence, he said carefully. Witnesses. Timelines. Something written. The men exchanged glances. Truth isn't what's written, the older one replied. It's what survives. That was when Thomas understood the danger. There was no mechanism here for being wrong, only for being convincing. A clerk dipped his quill and began to write. Thomas leaned forward instinctively, trying to read over his shoulder. What are you writing? He asked. Your account, the clerk said. Thomas swallowed. That's not my account, he said quietly. That's yours. The clerk paused, then continued writing anyway. Outside, raised voices carried through the thin walls. The man from the mill, the one who had been struck, was brought in briefly. He looked confused, bruised, afraid. When asked if he recognized Thomas, the man hesitated. Then he nodded. The clerk did not ask why. Thomas felt something shift inside him. A realization, cold and precise. This wasn't about finding the truth. This was about finishing the story as quickly as possible. As he was let out, Thomas noticed something that chilled him more than the rope. The clerk had already written the ending. They did not lock Thomas away. Instead, they placed him where he could be seen. He was made to wait in a narrow holding space near the square, close enough to hear the village, far enough to feel removed from it. People passed. Some stared. Some avoided looking at him altogether. Time moved strangely there, not measured by clocks, but by footsteps and shadows. A man was brought in and seated across from him, younger than Thomas, dirt under his nails, fear written plainly on his face. I didn't do it, the man whispered without introduction. They just needed someone. Thomas said nothing at first. Then softly, I think I made it worse. The man looked up. Thomas explained. Not everything, just enough. That the officials didn't care about precision. That words, once spoken, couldn't be taken back. That suspicion needed a shape, and Thomas had given it one. I told them when the theft couldn't have happened, Thomas said. So they decided who could have done it. The man stared at him, trying to understand. They said you're clever, he said. They said clever men are dangerous. A bell rang outside. A decision was being reached. Thomas stood suddenly, heart pounding. There has to be another way, he said. "You can't punish someone just to end a story." The constable didn't raise his voice. "We aren't ending it," he said. "We're correcting it." The man was taken away. Thomas watched him go, knowing, without being told, that this was how things disappeared here. Quietly, officially, permanently. For the first time since waking up, Thomas understood the truth of his situation. He wasn't trapped in the past. He was trapped in a system that did not forgive mistakes. And he had just made one. Night came early, not because the sun set faster, but because Thomas had nothing left to measure time with. No clock, no phone, just the slow dimming of light and the knowledge that once it was gone, no one would come looking for him. They moved him to a storage barn at the edge of the village. It wasn't locked. It didn't need to be. Where would he go? The floor was dirt. The walls breathed cold. Somewhere nearby, an animal shifted in its sleep, the sound steady and indifferent. Thomas sat with his back against the wall, arms wrapped around himself, trying to stay warm. He thought of the man who'd been taken away. He thought of the clerk's calm handwriting. He thought of how easily his words had fit into their version of events. For the first time in years, Thomas wished he hadn't been careful with facts. Care had led him here. A memory surfaced, small, ridiculous. An office meeting. Someone complaining about the coffee machine. Thomas rolling his eyes, thinking this is what passes for hardship now. He almost laughed. Almost. The cold crept in deeper. His hands trembled. His thoughts slowed, stretching thin at the edges. "If this is it," he whispered to no one, "it's a terrible way to learn." Sleep didn't arrive gently. It dragged him under. The sound was wrong. Too sharp, too loud, too modern. Thomas jerked upright, gasping, his heart hammering against his ribs. The barn was gone. So was the cold. So was the dirt floor. He was in his bed. Sunlight pressed through the curtains in familiar, rectangular shapes. The hum of distant traffic drifted in through a cracked window. Somewhere nearby, a phone vibrated angrily, demanding attention. For several seconds, Thomas didn't move. His hands were clenched so tightly they hurt. Slowly, carefully, he looked around. White walls, wardrobe, desk chair with a jacket draped over it. Normal. Too normal. The alarm kept ringing. He slapped it off and sat there, breathing hard, waiting for the panic to follow. It didn't. Instead, relief arrived in waves so sudden it made him dizzy. A dream. Of course it was a dream. His body sagged forward as he laughed once, short, sharp, almost hysterical. He pressed his palms to his face and stayed that way, counting his breaths like someone who just surfaced from deep water. Then he noticed his wrists. Red marks circled them faintly. Not rope burns exactly, but close enough to make his stomach drop. He swung his legs out of bed too quickly. His foot landed in something damp. Mud. Real mud. Tracked across the carpet in uneven footprints that led nowhere in particular. Thomas stared at them, his mind scrambling for explanations that refused to assemble. He reached for his phone with shaking hands. The screen lit up. Monday, 8:41 a.m. A notification blinked beneath it. Calendar reminder. Historical review. Witness inconsistency. 1723 case. Court today. Thomas laughed again. This time, it didn't sound relieved at all. Thomas showered longer than necessary. The heat helped. So did the certainty that the water would keep running as long as he asked it to. He stood there, eyes closed, letting modern life prove itself to him in small, comforting ways. When he stepped out, he felt foolish. Exhausted. Alive. At his desk, the laptop waited patiently. He opened the case file from the reminder on his phone, the same one he'd been working on the night before. An 18th century theft. A rushed conviction. A witness who hesitated before nodding. Thomas scrolled. The language was familiar now. Not just historically, but emotionally. A clerk summarizing what sounded right. A suspect chosen because the story needed an ending. A system that mistook speed for justice. Thomas leaned back in his chair. The dream hadn't come from nowhere. It had been built, piece by piece, out of his own anxiety, his fear of getting it wrong, his quiet guilt about deciding the fate of people he would never meet, based on paper that could never speak back. He laughed then, properly this time, not because it was funny, Because it was absurd, he closed the file and marked it for review. Outside, a car horn blared. Someone swore loudly. Life carried on, loud and imperfect and wonderfully inefficient. Thomas checked the time. He was late. He grabbed his shoes, paused, then swapped them for another pair, cleaner ones, sensible ones. As he left the house, he glanced once at the doorway, half expecting fog or stone or a bell. There was nothing, just a delivery van blocking the road. Thomas sighed, stepped around it, and muttered with genuine affection, "I am never romanticizing history again."